I was already sliding the latch closed when he did the one thing he hadn't done even once. Late afternoon in Reno always felt like the same blur to me. People lined up at the front desk asking the same urgent questions. Phones rang. Boxes of donated food stacked up in the hallway like we were moving in, not just trying to keep up. I smiled, because that's what you do, and inside I was counting minutes until the end of my shift. My name is Erin. I was 30 then, and I'd gotten good at sounding calm even when I wasn't. The hard-to-handle row was tucked in the far wing, away from the cheerful meet-and-greet rooms. It was quieter back there, but not in a peaceful way. More like the air held its breath. He was in the last kennel, pressed into the back corner. A domestic shorthair, brown mackerel tabby, adult, around 5 if the intake notes were right. Amber eyes, but he wouldn't use them on you. He didn't hiss. He didn't swat. He just made himself small and still, like if he stayed flat enough, the whole world might pass over him. His card said, "Owner move, unable to keep." Under that, in thick marker, no eye contact, won't approach. Someone had written a temporary name too, Rivet, like a little piece of metal holding something together. I remember thinking it was almost cruelly hopeful. A coworker passed behind me with a clipboard and didn't even slow down. "We've got another intake tomorrow," she said. "We're full. If he doesn't show progress, he'll go on the transfer list." Progress. That word always landed heavy. Because standing there, holding that folder, I had this quiet, ugly thought. I don't have any either. I was showing up, doing my job, and somehow getting emptier anyway. I opened the kennel just enough to set down fresh water, kept my movements small, practiced. I didn't reach toward him. I didn't ask for anything. Then I started to close the door again, eyes already on the latch, like it was safer to focus on metal than a living thing. That's when I saw him shift. Not toward the bowl, not toward the back wall. Toward me. Just an inch at first, the smallest change in his whole body. His paw slid forward on the blanket, quiet as dust, and he leaned until his whiskers were almost at the edge. My fingers were on the latch. I stopped breathing without meaning to. Was he actually coming closer? Or was I about to ruin the only brave decision he'd made with one wrong move? The next morning I walked in with disinfectant already in my nose. Everyone was moving fast. Gloves, carts, clipboards, like the building itself was late for something. I told myself, very firmly, I'm doing the minimum today. Feed, clean, notes, no getting attached. Rivet was still in that back corner when I reached his kennel. No eye contact, just that stillness, like he was trying to take up less space than a shadow. I opened the door just enough to slide out the tray. And then, because I rushed one tiny step, the latch didn't catch. The door swung a couple inches wider than I meant. He didn't bolt like a movie animal. He just slipped. One quiet, smooth movement, and suddenly he wasn't in the kennel anymore. For a second, I couldn't even think. Then the hallway filled with low voices, doors clicking shut, someone murmuring into a radio. I followed the only clue I had, silence that felt too deliberate. I found him in the supply closet, wedged between a mop bucket and the wall, pressed so tight you'd think he could flatten into it. His eyes were wide, but he wasn't staring at my face. He was staring at my hands. I knew what not to do. If I grabbed him, that would be the whole memory. If I backed away, he'd learn people were chaos and corners were safer. So I took off my jacket and lowered it to the floor. I moved it inch by inch, building a soft barrier, making the space smaller without touching him. When he shifted, I shifted with him. Slow, steady, no sudden reach. He didn't fight. He just didn't believe this could end gently. Eventually, he stepped onto the jacket, and I gathered it up like I was picking up laundry, guiding him back out and into the kennel without a scene. When the latch clicked this time, my hands were shaking harder than they had any right to. And right then, in the corridor, I heard someone say, "If we don't see progress fast, his transfer might get moved up." I stood there, with my fingers still buzzing from the latch, listening to that sentence land like a weight. His transfer might get moved up. A little later, we had a quick staff huddle in the break area. 5 minutes. Coffee that tasted like paper. Everyone half looking at the clock. Our manager didn't sound angry, just tired and practical. "We have to open space," she said. "If an animal isn't adapting, we have to choose a different path." Nobody argued, because it was true. The building was full. The phones didn't stop. and the next intake day was already coming. One of my coworkers suggested a working cat placement for Rivet. Not a home, really, more like a quiet spot where he could exist with minimal human contact. She said it like she was offering mercy. And maybe she was. But it hit me like giving up on the part of him that still wanted something more. Before I could talk myself out of it, I heard my own voice. "Give me 72 hours. I said, "I'll make a plan. No pressure. Just routine and safety. Let me try." It was a risk. If I failed, I'd be wasting time in a kennel and everyone's patience, and I was already running on fumes. Some days I felt like my feelings were a light switch I kept flipped off just to get through the shift, which was probably why Rivet got under my skin, because he looked like that same switch had been turned off inside him too. After the meeting, I went straight to his kennel. I didn't stand over him. I didn't ask for eye contact. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, hands in my lap like I was trying to prove they weren't a threat. I let the silence be normal. Rivet stayed in his corner, but his ears moved, small, precise, tracking every breath I took, every tiny shift of fabric, like he was reading me without looking at me. And it scared me a little, realizing this. Maybe progress wasn't him walking up to me. Maybe progress was whether I could stay right there, even when it started to feel uncomfortable to be seen trying. I kept my promise to myself and to him. Same time every day, same route through the building, same soft voice like a metronome, 5 minutes in the quiet hallway behind the laundry room where the air was warm and smelled like detergent and the noise from the lobby couldn't reach as easily. I'd sit next to his kennel and just be there, not hovering, not staring, no big speeches. My hands stayed low, palms turned in, like I was telling him without words, "I'm not coming at you." After a couple days, I noticed something small but important. Rivet didn't react to my face. He reacted to my hands. If my fingers moved too fast, his body tightened. If I reached even a little, his eyes went wide. Whatever he'd lived through, hands were the part he trusted least. So I stopped thinking trust would begin with petting. Trust, for him, had to start with predictability. I brought a plain strip of clean fabric, no treats tucked in, no catnip, nothing that felt like a trick. I set it near the front of the kennel and walked away. The first time, he didn't touch it until I'd been gone a while. When I checked later, it had shifted a couple inches, like he'd tested it with the smallest tap and then decided it was safe enough to move. The next day, he came out of the corner while I was still sitting there. Not toward me, just forward to the halfway point where he could see the hall and still retreat if he needed. He paused, listened, then turned his head away like he was embarrassed by his own courage. I wrote it down in his notes with shaking pride. Approached front while I was present. No panic. But the pressure didn't let up. On the board in the staff area, his name got a new mark beside it. Possible early transfer due to overcrowding. Just ink. But it felt like a countdown. That night, I sat in my car in the parking lot long after my shift ended. The building glowed behind me, and I stared at my steering wheel like it might give me an answer. I thought, for the first time out loud, what if I'm actually done? What if I can't keep doing this job without turning into someone empty? My phone rang, and the voice on the other end didn't waste time. "If you want to give him a real chance," she said, "you're going to have to take him as a foster. Tonight." By the time I finished the paperwork and carried Rivet out to my car, the sun was already down and my hands felt too tired to be steady. I kept telling myself I was doing this for him. But the truth was messier. I was doing it because I couldn't stand the thought of him getting moved again before anyone even learned what he needed. My apartment wasn't some cozy cat setup. It was small, quiet most of the time, and kind of bare because I'd stopped buying things that made me feel settled. You could hear people in the hallway if they talked loud enough. The neighbor's TV bled through the wall at night, and my lease had one of those vague pet rules that made you feel guilty even when you weren't breaking them. Rivet stayed frozen in the carrier when I brought him inside. Not panicked, just shut down, like his body was present and the rest of him was somewhere far away. I set the carrier on the kitchen floor and sat a few feet back, talking softly, the way you talk to someone who's been through too much and doesn't owe you anything. My safe room ended up being the little pantry off the kitchen. It had a real door, and it was the only spot I could control. No surprise corners, no traffic. I cleared out the bottom shelf, slid in a low litter box, a water bowl, and a cardboard box tipped on its side with a towel inside. Nothing fancy. Just predictable. When I opened the carrier, Rivet didn't run. He waited like he was deciding whether the air itself could be trusted. Then he stepped out, one careful paw at a time, and pressed himself behind the box so only the stripes on his back were visible. I could hear him sniffing, short and quiet, like he was taking inventory of danger. I sat on the kitchen floor with the pantry door between us, not fully closed, not fully open, and I said the things I usually swallowed. "I'm tired, buddy. I don't even know if I'm good at this anymore, but I can be quiet, I can be steady, I can try." That night, I woke up to tiny sounds. Soft steps, a pause, the faint scrape of cardboard. He was moving, testing, making sure the space stayed the same when he did. In the morning, I stood there with my keys in my hand, terrified of leaving him alone, and even more terrified of taking him back and undoing everything. I eased the pantry door almost shut, and in the sudden quiet, I didn't hear footsteps at all, just a small, careful sound from inside, like the gentlest question. I left that morning with my keys clenched in my fist. All through my shift, I kept checking my phone, even though there was nothing to check. No cameras, no updates, just my imagination filling the pantry with noise. On my lunch break, I caught myself staring at a wall, thinking about him alone in that small space, and my chest went tight. Not because I expected trouble, because I was afraid he'd disappear back into that corner inside himself. When I got home, I didn't turn on every light. I set my bag down softly and walked to the kitchen like I was entering someone else's room. Before I touched the pantry door, I turned my body sideways, shoulders low, not looming. I opened it an inch, then two. Rivet wasn't buried behind the box like the night before. He was right at the edge of it, half in shadow, watching the floor in front of me. His ears flicked, tracking every tiny movement. He didn't retreat. He just held his ground, like he was testing whether coming closer had changed the rules. I set a bowl down, slow enough my wrists started to ache. He followed it with his eyes, then looked away, like he hated how much he noticed me. I started to ease the door toward closed, to give him space the way I'd promised. And that's when he stepped once, just one careful step, and lifted a paw. He touched the sleeve of my sweatshirt, not a grab, not a scratch, barely a tap, like he was checking that I was real. My hand shook on the knob, not because I was scared of him, but because I understood what it meant. If I answered that touch the wrong way, I'd be teaching him something. And if I let it matter, I couldn't pretend this was just a temporary favor. So I didn't move. I lowered myself to the kitchen floor right there by the doorway and let my breath slow down on purpose. Rivet pulled his paw back. Then he stayed. We just sat in the same little pocket of quiet, two nervous creatures sharing air, and for the first time, it felt like trust might be something you could build without forcing it. My phone buzzed, a message from the building office. Unit inspections tomorrow. Please ensure access. And my stomach dropped. The next morning, I tried to be reasonable about it. An inspection is supposed to be simple. They look, they leave, life goes on. I told myself that over and over while my stomach stayed tight. Rivet felt the tension the second I got out of bed. My steps were quicker. My breathing was higher. I kept glancing at the clock like time itself was a threat. And the more I tried to act normal, the more he shrank into being a shadow again. Quiet, low, watching my hands like they were the whole story. I made my mistake before the knock even came. I started moving too fast, straightening the kitchen, shifting a chair, clearing the pantry doorway like I could control what today would feel like. I told myself it was for him. Really, it was for my fear. Then I heard voices right outside my unit. Keys clinked. A clip tapped against the wall. Someone said, clear as day, okay, next one. My pulse jumped. I cracked the front door just an inch to confirm it was them, and to buy myself 1 second to breathe. That was all it took. Rivet slipped out of the pantry area like smoke and glided past my legs. Not a sprint. Not chaos. Just a silent slide into the hallway, like he was returning to the one skill he trusted, disappearing. I didn't chase him. Chasing is loud. Chasing is hands grabbing. I followed slowly, talking under my breath without even realizing it. Hey, it's okay. I'm right here. On the stair landing, my neighbor was there with her old golden retriever. The dog didn't bark, didn't pull. He just sat steady and tired in the best way, like the whole building could rush around him and he'd still be calm. Rivet froze and looked at the dog. Really looked, not at me, not at my hands. And something shifted in his body. He didn't choose flight. He just waited, like he was seeing proof that being near someone didn't always mean danger. In that moment, I understood my job wasn't to catch him. It was to give him a choice. I lowered into a crouch and kept my hands still. I turned my sleeve toward him. The same sleeve he'd touched the night before. No reaching, no grabbing, no begging. Rivet took one step back, then another, and then he moved past me and slid back into my apartment, quiet as a breath, like he'd decided he wasn't ready to vanish again. When the door clicked shut, my legs went weak. The shelter was waiting for my 72-hour report. If I brought him back, the system might tuck him into a corner and call it manageable. If I kept him, I was taking on the responsibility I'd been trying not to feel. I opened my laptop and stared at the blank line on the form, realizing I wasn't about to sign paperwork. I was about to sign a new version of my life. That night, I filled out the form with my laptop, balanced on my knees, the cursor blinking like it was waiting to see if I'd flinch. I didn't make it dramatic. I didn't tell myself some big story about being brave. I just wrote the truth. I wanted to keep fostering Rivet, and if it worked out, I wanted to adopt him. Then I did something else that felt just as important. I opened my work calendar and stopped pretending I could run on empty forever. I asked for fewer back-to-back shifts. I offered help to my coworkers in ways that didn't require me to burn myself out, swapping one task, covering 1 hour, showing up on purpose instead of out of guilt. Rivet didn't turn into a social butterfly. He didn't suddenly curl in my lap and purr on cue. He stayed cautious. But he started building a routine like it was a bridge he could walk across. Every evening around the same time, he'd step out of the pantry area and head straight to the window in the living room. Same spot. Same careful hop onto the sill. He'd sit there and watch the parking lot lights come on, like he needed to see the world from a place that couldn't reach him. And then the small wins started stacking up, quiet and real. He'd pass me in the hallway without hugging the wall. One night, while I was reading, he climbed onto the far end of the couch and sat like he belonged there, even if he still kept a polite distance. Another time, I sneezed, loud and sudden, and he only startled, then stayed. When my keys slipped from my hand and hit the floor, he blinked hard, ears flicking, and didn't disappear. I went back to the shelter after that, not because I was forcing myself through it, but because I could feel my own pulse again. I could be present without numbing out. And every time I walked past the hard-to-handle row, I thought about that corner of a kennel, and how easy it is for the world to decide an animal is too much. Sometimes they don't need a loud rescue. They need one person who doesn't pull away. One evening, weeks later, the apartment was warm and quiet. The lamp by the couch gave everything a soft glow. Rivet came over like he does now, slow, deliberate, and touched my sleeve with the lightest tap of his paw. Not a request for anything, just a signal. I'm here. And I didn't jerk my hand away. I just stayed breathing like it was normal, letting that contact be what it was. Because trust isn't one moment you win. It's a choice you make again tomorrow. And for the first time in a long time, tomorrow didn't scare me.